I'm Hemant Mehta.
And this is Jessica Blimke.
And you're listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. We're here today with Peter Montgomery, who's a senior fellow for People for the American Way, where he also contributes to their brilliant Right Wing Watch blog. Peter, thank you for being with us.
Very happy to be here.
So, Peter, we hear that you just came from a screening of Rick Santorum's movie, so I want to hear all about it, please.
Yes, it's called One Generation Away, and it is a documentary. You can put that in quotes if you like.
Just what to say.
About just how dire is the threat to Christians in America today, and how dire is the threat to their religious freedom.
As if we're one generation away from Christianity going extinct? Is that the idea?
Pretty much. I mean, the whole movie ends with a just direct analogy to the church during the time of the rise of Hitler. So that's pretty much, they're pretty much telling Christians in America today that if they don't start fighting now, it's all over.
Wait, are they equating themselves to the Jews in the Holocaust? Because that's tasteless at best.
I think they're equating themselves more so to people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who resisted the rise of Nazism and was killed by the Nazis.
So the whole movie, and the movie is called Godwin's Law, you said? That's... yeah.
So did they have specific examples of ways Christians are being prosecuted?
They tell a number of stories. I mean, this was filmed clearly before Hobby Lobby won at the Supreme Court, because one of the stories is about Hobby Lobby and the Green family being, forced to comply with the contraception mandate. A couple of the stories are sort of the familiar ones around same-sex marriage and business owners being required by states to abide by anti-discrimination laws. So they sort of tell one of the stories about a baker who didn't want to make a cake for a same-sex couple and a florist who didn't want to do flowers for a gay wedding.
It is amazing how fighting for Christianity is now down to, we're all fighting about cakes. Or
Yeah.
they don't want to. That's what they're hanging this whole argument over. We refuse to bake for you.
Well, and there's some other. It's interesting because they actually interview some advocates of church-state separation in order to show just how evil advocates for church-state separation are. So they quote Barry Lynn from Americans United, and
who is, by the way, like the nicest, calmest guy in the world.
Yes, and he's very effective.
Did they put devil horns on him in the movie? That would work.
But I think I heard a woman behind me whisper that he was a monster.
Wow. So the film works, I guess.
Well, it's funny. As a movie, I think, it's basically just one long parade of religious right talking heads. I mean, they interviewed a lot of people. And so I think in order to try to keep it from being just a really boring array of talking heads, they just have this bizarre use of stock footage of Americana scenes and boats on the water and people in the street.
Christian boats.
Flashes every 2 seconds. So it's this bizarre, while they're talking about all this threat, you're getting this hyperdrive of Americana images on the screen.
So they want to go back to this supposed way we used to be that, historically speaking, we never really were that anyway to begin with.
Oh, it was separate but equal in those days.
Clearly, you have been brainwashed by the current reigning secular problem.
Apparently. Well, let me ask you a serious question then about this movie. Usually when we hear about quote-unquote Christian movies, things like God's Not Dead or some of those other Christian movies, they're always they're badly made movies. Not even criticizing the message they're trying to send. They're just knockoff.
Objectively bad.
Yeah, they're objectively bad movies. Is this film, does it succeed as a documentary, or is it just a bad documentary too?
I think it must really depend on the attitude you bring to it, because I did not think it was terribly effective. I thought the kind of, way they just flooded you with short images while people were talking didn't work that well. But during the Q&A afterwards, there was a woman who was literally moved to tears because she was so grateful that they had told the stories so well that she finally would have this important tool that she could use in her own work. So,
it has its fans.
They pretty successfully made these small business owners, the baker in Oregon, who her whole dream, her whole life had been to do what she was doing and making wedding cakes, and that she basically was shut down and lost her business. And so they tell the story in a way that makes her a sympathetic character. So
right.
Some of it is pretty effective storytelling. The other bad movie that I recently saw was Dinesh D'Souza's movie about America, and that was just bad on every level.
It was badly made. It was the message didn't come across effectively.
It's just bad.
It's just bad. which describes Dinesh D'Souza pretty well.
I mean, his movie, America, Imagine the World Without Her, his basic premise is that people don't love America enough because they've been taught to be ashamed of her, and so he's going to go through and undo all that, miseducation you've got. So he then sort of proceeds to try to explain away the genocide of the Indians, African-American slavery, kind of those things. So it doesn't really work.
Really quick, before we move from this topic, Rick Santorum's role in this is what?
Well, his new thing, other than thinking about running for president again, is that he works at this Christian movie studio called Echolight Productions. So he's trying to make money in the film biz by making movies for $1 or $2 million that they can market specifically to a Christian market. And so that's kind of, there's a whole conservative evangelical movement in Hollywood now that is kind of trying to make more movies because they think that part of why they're losing these culture war battles is because the liberals in Hollywood have been so effective at using the medium of films and storytelling, and they're trying to do some of it on their own. Now, he also said that this movie, they're not even trying initially to bring it out in theaters. They're just trying to get churches to show it and sell tickets in thousands of mega churches. And I don't know if that's a money-making model for them, but he sort of says it's because they want to let people use the film to draw people back into church and put the church back at the center of culture in America. So we'll see how that goes.
So does he have a specific goal? Is it just generally, I want more people in church, or is he looking for numbers or something like? Is
he trying to build a voter base?
Right.
Well, I think he's trying to make money. This is now part of his business is to try to make money by making and marketing movies to the large audience of conservative evangelicals. There's people like Sarah Palin who've learned how to make a lot of money selling books to that crowd. So I think he wants to do this with movies, and along the way, he certainly hopes to encourage conservative pastors to get more involved in politics. They're going to sell some kind of action kit with the movie that is being done with the American Family Association.
Please tell me you mean action figures.
No, full-fledged action kits. Here's what you do after you see the movie.
That's right. You got to do something. Well, it's interesting. Every religious right conference I go to, pretty much without fail, one of the central messages is the problem is us. The problem is that the church is not standing up enough. The problem in America is that pastors are not preaching aggressively enough, and that's part of the message of the people behind this movie too. Is that there's too many pastors who are timid, who are afraid of the political correctness police, and so they're watching America go to hell because they're not willing to stand up.
The culture's not changing. It's the church's fault for not doing enough to stop the culture from changing.
That's exactly right.
Well, you had me at the problem is us, and then all the other crap you lost me on, I hate to say.
Yes, I mean, when I think about the problems in America, the fact that the church is not aggressive enough rarely rises to the top of the list.
Yeah. And by the way, how do you score tickets to a movie like this?
Oh, yeah, we should do that.
How did you get on the guest list?
I got invited to that because from the National Organization for Marriage, because I'm on their activist list. I got an invite through them. So
We need to get in some lists, Hammett. I want to see that.
I'm not sure if it's worth it because getting on all these lists requires going to a lot of conferences that you might not really enjoy that much.
That's true. That's true. So let's switch gears to Right Wing Watch, this website that's a project of the People for the American Way. For people who don't visit Right Wing Watch, you need to. I mean, I do it on a regular basis, but basically, you have a team of people who basically monitor what the religious right is saying. They monitor Pat Robertson's 700 Club and Brian Fisher's radio show and all these right-wing people. And the best part is they don't offer necessarily analysis. They say, hey, Pat Robertson said this on his show. Here's the quote. Here's the clip. And boom, there it is. Have at it. And they do this for everything. So I guess a question I have for you is, how do you guys make that work? How do you maintain your sanity? And who drew the short straw and got stuck watching the 700 Club every day?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people over the years who've come through that who, have some sort of PTSD from having to watch Pat Robertson for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. But, it's like any form of activism. There's some of us who just kind of really have sort of a sick enjoyment of listening to this stuff and pulling out the most relevant, most ridiculous things. And, generally we've found that the most effective thing for a lot of these people is to,
just quote them.
To quote them, to put their own words out there. And sometimes, Brian Fisher from the American Family Association goes back and forth between thanking us for helping him get his message out because we get his stuff up on the website before he does, and then complaining about how we take him out of context. But the beauty of the technology we have now, so that we can put up the audio and put up the video, and it's a lot harder for people to back away from their words.
Yeah, and in fact, it's Right Wing Watch that got a TV show canceled. I think it was by these guys, the Benham brothers. They recently had a show on like HGTV, like a flipping your house and we'll renovate your home. Totally random show that, I don't know, I wouldn't watch anyway. But it got canceled because Right Wing Watch was able to show clips of, I think, one of the brothers, maybe the father of these twin brothers, saying such horrible, nasty, anti-gay things, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had been more familiar with the father, who's just one of the most out there anti-abortion religious right activists, but it turned out that his two sons have sort of followed in his footsteps, and they've been engaged in sort of strident anti-gay activism. And one of the interesting things, because now, the brothers now they're now folk heroes on the religious right.
Right, they became martyrs,
freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But they a few years ago in Charlotte, North Carolina, they're from North Carolina, had gone to the city council and basically demanded that the city council not provide any permits for the gay groups to have a pride event. So it's pretty hard for me to stomach them portraying, preening as martyrs to freedom when they have a record of trying to squelch other people's freedom.
Well, it shouldn't be too surprising that Christians love themselves a martyr. That's kind of what they're all based around. Because, that happened, the Duck Dynasty thing that happened. People lost their whole mind when a guy was aggressively homophobic and suffered the consequences of that. And people were like,
yeah, that wasn't martyrdom. That's kind of we don't want to watch your show.
Right.
That's kind of how it works.
Well, and it's this amazing phenomenon of taking disagreement and criticism as persecution and pretending and, using this, martyrdom and persecution rhetoric. We actually recently did a whole report on their use of religious persecution as a strategy. And I actually think they should be ashamed of that, because we see people around the world who really do face horrific persecution because of their religious beliefs or their lack of religious beliefs. And so for these very privileged people who have TV empires and plenty of political influence in the United States to pretend as if they're somehow can wrap themselves in the moral banner of persecution, I really think it's shameful.
Yeah, there really are Christian martyrs out there, and
Right.
it's not these guys.
Right.
It's the ones, in other countries.
That's right. And having someone disagree with what you say, and having someone use their own First Amendment rights to criticize what you've said while you were using your First Amendment rights, it's not persecution. It's not trying to silence you. It's calling you out.
Yeah. And there is a difference between, it's not a freedom of speech thing. It's, no, you're just getting criticized because we heard what you had to say.
Well, I think it became really clear that people don't understand what the First Amendment entails with...
It's government speech. And
right, with government
like
speech, and the government can't tell you not to say something. It doesn't mean if I say awful things that there aren't repercussions to the things I say.
Right. Well, and it's the hypocrisy is just... It's so obvious it's laughable. You have groups like the American Family Association, the Family Research Council. They're all for calling boycotts of corporations that support gay pride events or advertise on TV shows they don't like. That's
or say Happy Hanukkah
great.
or Happy Holidays too.
But the second somebody criticizes Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty, it's oh my God, it's an attack on freedom and it's an attack on the First Amendment, America itself. It's just ridiculous. So that's why we like to quote their own words so we can go back and say, yeah, these are the same guys who called these 12 boycotts who are now complaining that boycotts are economic terrorism.
Yeah, and it actually does like what The Daily Show does too, which is to say, you just said this. Well, guess what? We have the record of what you said, 5-10 years ago, and here it is, and there's the hypocrisy for you.
Yes, we're quite delighted when The Daily Show or Colbert or Rachel Maddow uses some clips that we've managed to find.
Yeah, that is amazing. How did this project even begin? I'll be perfectly honest. I had kind of heard of People for the American Way, but I didn't really know about them until I started reading Right Wing Watch, and so that you guys were a project of that larger organization. How did PFAW, how did People for the American Way even begin this? As it sounds like a side project that kind of blossomed into its own thing. Like, how did that even begin?
Well, it's interesting. So how People for the American Way started was a little over 30 years ago. Norman Lear, TV producer, made shows like All in the Family and Maude and a lot of those things. He had decided he wanted to do a TV show or a movie project looking at televangelists. So he started watching some of them. And this was right at the rise of the religious right when these guys were becoming much more political. Jerry Falwell and James Robertson, in the lead up to Reagan's election, and they were basically saying you couldn't be a good American if you weren't the right kind of Christian, and you couldn't be a good Christian if you didn't share their right-wing political beliefs. Anyway, Norman Lear, listening to this stuff, he was so disturbed, hearing them pray for the death of a Supreme Court justice and say this kind of stuff, that he dropped his plans for a TV show and took a break from his TV stuff to create an organization that could act as a response in the media and in the culture to sort of take on this religious right effort to claim faith and family and freedom for this narrow band of the right wing. So so from the beginning of the organization, part of what it has done is, this. We've been listening to Robertson and these guys for 30 years, but a lot of it would go into reports. It would go to reporters, and it really was the advent of the internet and sort of the birth of blogs and activism online that allowed us to get the research out much more widely. And
is there a certain time when Right Wing Watch really took off?
I have a terrible time frame memory, but I would say maybe 5-6 years ago.
And was it one particular
and in the last
issue?
couple of years, it's been growing rapidly. So.
Yeah, I see it everywhere. It's just quoted nonstop because no one else gets that raw footage up and fast and available.
Well, nobody else wants to.
That's true. No one else wants to watch all that stuff either.
We watch so you don't have to, right?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And for that, we thank you.
Well, and we also, so we do have this, great quantity of daily material that goes up, but then we will also step back and think about all the stuff we're seeing and do longer reports that are more analytical that say, what does this tell us about their strategy on religious liberty, or what does this tell us about? And so then we do some longer reports that we call Right Wing Watch and Focus that are available at the People for the American Way website. That look at, okay, here's their playbook on anti-immigration stuff. Here's the 8 strategies they're using and other things. So all the daily reporting that we do kind of feeds into the knowledge base that we try to use to help really understand and help the progressive movement respond to those political strategies.
So thinking of religious liberty, I think the three of us can agree that religious liberty means you have to live in a country where other people also get rights and get to pray the way they want to, whereas it seems that right-wing Christians' idea of religious liberty is I get my way and nobody gets their way. Do you think that's being naive? Do you think that they don't understand what it is to be actually repressed? Or do you think it's willful ignorance? Or do you think it's just, I want my way and I don't care what I have to do to get it?
I think it's a little of all those things, and I think it varies. There are some people in the religious right who really believe that the First Amendment only applies to Christians. Mm-hmm. They think that the Constitution came out of the Bible and was meant for Christians, and the First Amendment does not apply to Muslims or to Mormons or others. So there's that fringe part of the right, and that includes people with big audiences like Brian Fisher. Mm-hmm. And then there are other people, some of the legal groups like the Becket Fund, which was the lawyer in the Hobby Lobby case, who on the sort of the non-establishment front, they do defend the rights of Muslims when their ability to build a mosque is being attacked by local Christians who don't want a mosque in their community. So I would say that it varies across the religious rights. Some really do stand on principle that religious freedom is for everybody, and some think it's as you said, the argument they used to say, I want what I want, and if I don't get it, you're repressing me.
Sometimes when I write about creationism, I get comments from some people who are like, why are you harping on this one issue? No one's legitimately a creationist. So we're talking about a fringe group of people. And then the polls come out and we're talking like half of Americans accept creationism. And I wonder, sometimes when you guys post Pat Robertson clips or Brian Fisher clips, I feel like you may get comments from people who are saying, no one listens to Pat Robertson. No one takes these guys seriously. Do you have any idea of how many people are actually listening to them? How big their audience is? How many of them take them seriously?
Millions of people are listening to them, and we do get those kind of comments. And we get, I'm most frustrated when we get those kind of comments from journalists or people who say, oh, Brian Fisher only has an audience because you make a big deal out of him. If you ignored him, everybody would ignore him. And that is so false. I mean, your points about creationism and looking at the polling is true. Just because we ignore Brian Fisher does not mean that he's not going out on 200 radio stations across the country every day.
There is a difference between Brian Fisher with an audience like that.
Don't ask us why we listen to Brian Fisher. Ask Republican members of Congress and Republican presidential candidates why they go on his show. They clearly think he has an audience worth reaching. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what we want to do is hold those kind of people accountable. We want public officials who give Brian Fisher credibility to be held accountable for the extremism that they're promoting.
Yeah, and there's a difference between someone like, I guess, Brian Fisher, who has this sizable audience, and maybe a group like the Westboro Baptist Church, which, I don't even think any Christians are legitimately saying, yeah, those guys are great.
They got a point.
Yeah, no one's saying that, but they are saying that in conservative circles about these guys that you guys follow.
Well, yes, and it's in some parts of the country, it may depend on where people live, too. In some parts of the country where the religious right is really dominant, this is why we have textbook battles in Texas, where you have David Barton and these other religious right figures acting as the hired experts to the State Board of Education when they're rewriting the social studies curriculum and setting standards for science textbooks. It is not some little group that's just talking to themselves. They have powerful allies in state legislatures and in Congress and if they're lucky, in the White House.
You know what? I had to ask you. Sometimes I see you guys not just saying, "Look at this crazy thing this person said," but in the case of like David Barton, David Barton makes some claim. He is mathematically wrong about what he's saying. I think one time he was like, I've given this many speeches over the summer and I work this many hours a day and there are not that many hours in a day. Like, it's mathematically wrong.
Right.
And I wonder, when you have irrefutable proof like that, do these guys still make the same talking points even when they've been called out on it?
Yes. David Barton is immune, apparently, to being called out for telling demonstrable lies.
Yeah.
I mean, he repeatedly talks about parts of the Constitution being drawn verbatim from the Bible, and he throws out specific Bible verses. Well, if you go and look at the Bible verse, of course, it's not true. And we keep calling him out, but that doesn't slow him down.
Is he doing that on purpose? Does he know he's been caught, or do you think he genuinely believes, like, no, look, the Bible says this, the Constitution says this, there's a direct link between them?
I think he believes that he is on a divine mission to sort of reclaim America's Christian heritage, and he doesn't, he'll pick whatever facts he thinks help him make that case, and he doesn't worry about stuff that runs counter to it.
Little things like facts.
Yeah. I guess part of me feels better about knowing that he genuinely believes this stuff, even though he's completely wrong. Because, I mean, that is better than being a willing con artist.
Like he's not a Disney villain.
Yeah, it's not like he knows what he's doing is wrong.
Both. I mean, he clearly, unless he just does not know what the word verbatim means, he knows he's not telling the truth when he says the language in the Constitution comes verbatim from the Bible. It just doesn't. Now, he'll twist and describe it in some way to say, well, the principles of, our separation of powers come out of, the book of Deuteronomy or something.
Mm-hmm.
But, a number of the claims he's making, I mean, he had his last book withdrawn, taken off the shelves by a Christian publishing house because even a bunch of Christian historians, were calling out all the things that were wrong with it. So it's not as if his facts have been debunked.
Yeah. So do you think any one person within the Christian right now is more influential than anybody else? Like, is David Barton really, really the biggest name out there? Is it somebody else?
Yeah, I would say David Barton is influential because his teachings about the Christian nation history have really been embraced by a lot of the Republican leadership and a lot of the religious right, and you hear it from everybody from Newt Gingrich to candidates. So I would say he's influential that way. Someone like Tony Perkins at the Family Research Council is very kind of an influential insider Washington lobbyist. But there's a whole infrastructure of Christian law schools and colleges and organizations like the Heritage Foundation, which is this huge behemoth in Washington, D.C., that create this entire infrastructure. So if one person fails or one group kind of flops, there's always something there to pick up the slack.
And then one last question for you, which is, the Republicans who may be running for president in 2016, let's hypothetically say gay marriage is no longer a contentious issue by that point. The tide has completely turned. It's legal all across the country. I suspect these conservative groups will still oppose marriage equality, homosexuality, all that stuff. I would think that Republican candidates who want to become president will not want to side with them on that issue. It's just a losing issue. Do you think there will still be this tight bond between the religious right and, political conservatives?
Well, in 2016, we're going to have a number of religious right candidates running for the Republican nomination. Among the possibilities are Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, Ted Cruz. There's plenty of them out there, and that's going to make it hard for anybody to try to slide too far away from the issues that are motivating the religious right. And the religious right voters, the conservative evangelicals, are still a huge part of the Republican Party base. Now, younger evangelicals are much more pro-equality on marriage and other gay issues than older evangelicals. but they're still not the majority. So it's going to put Republican presidential candidates between a rock and a hard place, kind of the same way Republicans in Congress are now sometimes with the Tea Party, that they really encouraged this Tea Party, this language of, tyranny and everything else. And now you've got Tea Party candidates running from the right and knocking out members of Congress, sort of, this extremism is kind of feeding it on itself. So I don't think that the religious right is going to diminish too much as a force in the Republican Party in the near future.
Okay, well, that's our time. Thank you so much for joining us today. We can find you at rightwingwatch.org. And do you have any other personal blogs you'd like to, or personal projects you'd like to push?
No, I also do some writing at religiondispatches.org, which is a sort of progressive online magazine of religion and politics and culture that comes out of the USC School of Journalism. And you can find me on Twitter at Piedmont.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. This episode was taped at Cinnamon Sound Studios in Aurora, Illinois, and the music was written and performed by Brad Chagdis. If you like what you're hearing, please consider making a contribution at patreon.com/Hemant, that's He-Man T. We appreciate your support. I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Blumke. We hope you'll join us next time.